Good afternoon. Welcome to CGI U 2017. Please silence your cell phones, but feel free to tweet using the hashtag CGI U 2017. Thank you.
I got a call from the Dean of Admissions asking if you were to get into Harvard, would you accept? And I said yes, because I knew my mom would kill me if I said anything else.
The first few weeks, I made some of my best friends, but 2 of us were sexually assaulted before classes had even started.
I went to the Dean of Students' office, and she said, I just want to make sure that you don't talk to anyone about this.
They protect perpetrators because they have a financial incentive to do so.
The problem of sexual assault on campuses is enormous.
I think it's fair to say that they cover these crimes up. There's a lot of victim blaming.
He lectured us about how we shouldn't go out in short skirts.
They told me, despite the fact that I had a written admission of guilt, that what I presented to them could only prove that he loved me.
They discourage them from going to the police. If it goes to the police, then it's more likely to end up as a public record.
Universities are protecting a brand.
Campus police cannot contact an athlete.
He won the Heisman Trophy with his DNA rape kit.
Just sit down with the students and ask them, where are the hot spots?
SAE, sexual assault expected.
The second most common type of insurance claim against the fraternity industry is for rape.
Her rapist's name matched the name of 2 other cases, and he was allowed back on campus.
The message is clear, you're not gonna win.
We started seeing, what was happening at campuses across the country.
Hi.
Why has no one connected the dots before?
These students went from sexual assault victims to survivors and now activists.
My name is Carolyn Luby.
My name is Alexa Schwartz.
My name is Ari Mostov.
This is a national problem.
We are fed up!
I was getting threatened. It was working in their favor to silence me, and I was terrified.
I thought if I told them, they would take action, but the only action they took was against me.
We've got a lot further to go.
Please welcome Amelia Harnish.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce our commitment makers. We have 2 to introduce. The first one is Meghna Chandra and Faraz Ahmed. Their challenge is crimes against women are rampant in the city of Bangalore, India. And because many women there are illiterate, it is difficult to empower them with knowledge of or access to their legal rights. The city reports the 3rd highest number of attacks against women among 53 Indian cities. Women in Bangalore are sexually targeted in public, in offices, in schools, everywhere, making it known as a dangerous place for women. They are addressing it by with Shakti, a new commitment designed to empower women through the use of cell phones to stay safe, to access the police in the event of an incident, and to learn their legal rights in bringing justice. A basic smartphone costs $15 to $20 in India, and 68% of households have them. But roughly 400,000 women do not have them nor know how to use them. Shakti will design an app that can be used in 3 different languages or no language at all through visual aids. Shakti hopes to facilitate access to the smartphone app through low-cost plans and the sharing of phones among groups of women. To ensure that the phones are used by women, they will be painted pink and or embedded in mobile phone purses to reduce the chances of the phones being appropriated by men. I love that. Shakti will begin in Bangalore with a plan to increase access to legal information for women throughout the country. It will conduct periodic focus groups to ensure the current information is relevant, accessible, and communicated in an effective manner. Success will be evaluated by the number of Shakti's users. So, congrats. There you go. Thank you. Oh, you want to take a picture? Okay, and then up next we have Ciara Blem. Her challenge, the sexual assaults on college campuses occur with alarming frequency. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted while in college. Equally alarming is that over 90% of these incidents in the United States go unreported. There is stigma about sexual assault that keeps people from reporting them, and a lack of understanding about what campus officials and friends can do to support rape victims. Ciara is an interactive mobile app to help victims of sexual assault create a plan of action based on relevant available resources. By empowering both victims and people on campus with the appropriate tools to access them, the culture of rape can change from stigma to support. The app will ask the victim episode-related questions, such as whether the police, medical attention, emotional support services, or a rape kit is needed, whether the victim needs a place to feel safe, and whether the victim wishes to report it. Through the app, the victim will be in a safe space, free of judgment and helplessness. Questions on Sierra will also address third parties who want to help the victim of sexual assault. Sierra will offer a crash course on how to support a survivor with understanding and compassion. There will be location features, be multilingual, and be able to ensure anonymity. Sierra will partner with the University of Denver to start. The app is expected to be fully operational at the Denver campus for the 2018-2019 school year by providing victims with enhanced access to a variety of resources. The reporting of sexual assaults is expected to increase there by 60% by the end of 2019. So, congrats. For you. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, and so now I want to bring up our panelists. First I'll introduce myself. My name is Amelia Harnish. I'm a senior features writer at Refinery 29. I cover long-form and reported features on women's health, reproductive rights, and gender equality. So that's who I am. You can follow me on Twitter at Amelia_Faith, if you want to. And then, the first person I want to bring up is Dr. Kim Kirkland, who is let me just read so I can make sure I'm getting it right. Dr. Kirkland is the Executive Director, Equal Opportunity and Access at Oregon State University, has been there since 2017. Has previously held multiple positions in this work for multiple years. She's also the author of Enough with the Stuff, Strategies for Diffusing Organizational Noise. Next, we have Amanda Nguyen. She is the founder and CEO of RISE, a nonprofit working to implement a sexual assault survivor bill of rights. Her organization has been successful in passing a federal bill of rights for sexual assault survivors, and just recently found out that the 12th state law in California was passed. Very exciting. And then finally, we have Amy Ziering, who is the two-time Emmy Award-winning and Academy Award-nominated documentary filmmaker. Her most recent film, we saw a clip of it from called The Hunting Ground. Amy also, her previous film was called The Invisible War, which was about sexual assault and rape in the military. So, all people, excuse me, let me get myself in order here. Sorry, guys. So we have a really great panel for you today. Thank you again for coming. I just want to open it up first with a question about culture. We often think of campuses as places of exciting social change and being on the forefront of those changes, but they are also places that are steeped in traditions, and oftentimes those traditions are rooted in centuries-old power dynamics. So I want to open it up to you guys, and let's start there. How do these traditions and just the culture of campus in general encourage a rape culture or a culture where sexual violence is normalized?
Okay, I will start with that. We recently conducted a sexual violence climate assessment back in May. And I would tell you that some of the open narratives around the feedback indicates that, not to place disparages on one group, but the Greek life community was raised as an inbreeding field for cultivating sexual misconduct. The comments range from the administration knows what happens in those Greek houses, right? They just turn a blind eye. They know there's drinking. They know there's drugs. They know there's partying, and these things happen. And what happens is survivors won't report, because if they are part of a sorority, say, so to speak, they are trying to stay in and fit in or get in, right? So being alienated, isolated from a group is important to people. They have 4 years on a campus and don't want to be, removed from a group or from friends or from a network. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. I'm not saying it's right, but I would also tell you that when we looked at reporting, we, out of 27,000, say, students on campus, residential predominantly, we surveyed 5,000. 20% responded, so that's about 1,000, right? 64% said that that survey tool was the first time that they reported or spoke of an incident that happened to them. Now, that's 640 people out of 1,000, which says there are reasons people won't report because they're trying to stay plugged in, connected, fit in or get in to something. And while they know what consent is, know where to report, know how to report, and believe the university, high marks would be fair and objective, they won't do it. So more needs to be done, right? But that's unfortunately the reality we face in constantly trying to encourage reporting, but people have to live in the spaces, right, that we create.
Mm-hmm. Amy, I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Since the hunting ground was a incredible exploration of also the campus culture, but you also did an exploration of the military, and those are two specific cultures that have their own rules, and I'm just curious if you have thoughts about how are they the same and how are they different, but how do they both sort of end up with a culture of difficulty for victims?
Is this, okay, good. Well, right, sexual assault and rape are a problem in our society at large, and part of it is, so we can break it down, and part is that, our culture allows predators to prey with impunity. That's what rape culture means. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is it's just a small percentage of men that commit these crimes, be they in the military, be they in the White House, be they in the entertainment industry, mm-hmm. be they on campuses. Mm-hmm. But certain cultures give better cover to these criminals. So that's where those mm-hmm. institutions like the military mm-hmm. or the entertainment industry, and coupled with that, our culture at large gives them cover as well. Okay, so those are the important things to remember. As far as, people always say, well, why don't you just do a film on sexual assault at large? Why? Because there's certain very interesting things about certain institutions in our culture where these rates can go even higher. So campuses and the military present perfect storm conditions for the proliferation of these crimes because predators can embed in them and act over and over again. We also know that the MO for a rapist or a sexual assault offender is they're repeat offenders. It's not a one-off crime. So if you're in a culture where you can commit this crime over and over again and nothing happens to you, we get these epidemic numbers. So what do I mean by why are these how do these? I'll use the military and campuses. How are they perfect storm conditions? Well, you have a large transient young population. So you have lots of ample prey available. I like to think, that's why we called it the hunting ground. I'm really trying to get away from the rhetoric of date rape or it's target rape. This is a premeditated crime, because I also think if we change our vocabulary, that'll help change rape culture. Because it's not he said, she said, it's not confusion, it's not miscommunication. It's actually, it performs statistically like a premeditated crime, like any other, okay? That's like base one for understanding this. So if you're on a campus or in the military, you have a large, ample opportunity. You have a large transient population of people that predators can prey upon. The second thing is you have a culture that is, you live in close community quarters, lots of partying, so there's also ample opportunity. So there's not only ample persons available, but ample opportunities to assault people. And the last part, which is equally important, is there's super poor investigation and adjudication processes in place. Mm-hmm. So if you have that, we saw that both in the military and on campuses, and if you have those three things, basically what we saw in the military and campuses, it's a playground for predators. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's very little they can do, and actually someone we interviewed in Invisible War said it's actually a training ground for predators. I mean, you just get better and better, which we saw, and actually we're seeing now with Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, if you read all the accounts, there's a clear MO, you know. That's what I also mean and hope, and I want us all to be messaging out that this is a repeat offender crime. It's not he said, she said. It's not blurred lines. It's not a mixed up communication. It really isn't.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So I definitely want to get to the adjudication and reporting process, but before we do that, I wonder if you guys have any thoughts. What we're saying here is that, you know, we need a culture change on campus, right? So what is one thing or a handful of things? What are the things that people can do? How do you change a culture? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if I go back to the survey, I would say the students would suggest that we just shut all Greek life community houses down, right? That's one approach. Is probably not the best. It's how do we teach people, reach people? So we do a lot of bystander intervention training on campus, and it's called our Beavers Give a Damn, right? We are the Oregon State Beavers. So the Beavers Give a Damn program is designed to engage students. You know, if you're at a party with a friend, an associate, it doesn't have to be your roommate, somebody you know. If you see or is aware that someone has probably overdrank, not probably the best to go off with somebody that's trying to coax them off, don't be a bystander. Say something. Intervene. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that we are encouraging students to put themselves in harm's way, but it's incumbent upon us to help each other. Are you sure you're okay? You sure you want to do this? Let me walk you home. Let's walk home together after the party. Let's not go upstairs. We have to start taking an active role in inserting ourselves in the situations that we see and know are bad. Mm-hmm. And at a party, it's visible. It's clear in some cases. So we have to speak up, and people are doing that in big ways. And I would say, based on the survey feedback, there is between 29 and 42% that, in terms of bystanders, students would say that 29 to 42% of the time, most always, they would do something, say something. The other piece is, we require all employees on campus to be responsible employees. And what does that mean? Well, as a responsible employee, you don't get to just sit idly by. You have a duty to report if you see something, hear something, know something, third, fourth, fifth party, whatever that is, to say something. And you have to say that something to me as the Title IX coordinator of that campus. You have a duty to report, and you don't get to offer confidentiality or privacy to a student or anyone that's going to try to tell you something in confidence. As a campus, we have to discern whether what's being asserted is, if it's remotely true, is outrageous and egregious, then somebody may need to be kicked off campus. Mm-hmm. And if you don't report, we can't do that, right? So accountability is holding people accountable when we know, right? If we don't know, there's nothing we can do. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes we have some, I would call it low-level stalking. Stalking is stalking. But sometimes people don't want anything done. They'll say, I don't want anything done. We just broke up, and I just need him to stop calling, right? Then we can go wave a finger in somebody's face and say, look, stop calling, right? Because they need to hear that. And if you would continue to call, here's what's going to happen to you. But if we don't get the call, get notice, or become aware, our hands are tied, right? Mm-hmm. So it's incumbent upon employees to report when they know, hear, see something, and it's incumbent upon students to insert themselves in processes or in situations or incidents when they observe that something is probably going to go south because of the dynamics of what's going on, right?
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to answer?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. For those who went to my office hours, this will be a little redundant, but to answer your question, so what can we do? This is a really big problem, and it's a little daunting. It's actually really daunting. What can we do? I think the most powerful thing that we all have is our voice. And speaking up about something may be scary. I know it was really scary for me. I'm a rape survivor, and I decided to tell my story. It doesn't have to be a personal story. It can just be why you're motivated to fight for what you care about. So either coming from a perspective of a survivor, or as a friend, as an ally, or just a general decent human being. It's important. And sometimes you may feel alone. And this is not just in the context of being a survivor. You may feel alone because you feel like you're fighting the fight and it's really hard to. Maybe people are telling you it's not worth it, or people are telling you can't do it. And I remember the first time that I lobbied the Massachusetts State House, it was 6 straight hours of me telling my story, and politicians just straight up being like, so this is not going to get me votes. Like, I'm sympathetic to what you're going through. I get that it's a civil rights violation, but my constituents don't know me for this. And on one hand, I'm like, thanks for your honesty, I guess. But on the other hand, I was like, geez. And I went home and I just cried because I was like, wow, this sucks. And I remember, because I'm a pathological optimist, the next day I got up and I did the same thing, but this time in the United States Congress. And I got into an Uber, and there is, this driver who was a big, intimidating man. He didn't really talk to me. He was pretty stoic. But then he saw that I was going to the Senate, and so he asked me why. And I told him, I'm fighting for a sexual assault survivor bill of rights right now. It's now law, but at the time, I'm fighting for it. And this is my story, and this is why I'm doing it. And this complete stranger, like, I'm not even kidding, he's just bawled. Like, he just, all of a sudden, tears just, like, welled from his eyes. And he looked at me and he said, my daughter is a survivor, and I just want to let you know, like, thank you so much for fighting for her. And has anyone told you they love you today? I love you, and I will never forget that dad. There are so many people who may be affected by your work, and maybe they're not telling you it straight up, or maybe they're not sharing, why they care about it, but if you're doing it for the right reasons and you think that history is on your side, no matter how scared you are, like, you can outsmart the patriarchy. You know what I mean? And it is so possible.
Great.
If I can add to that, that was both of you beautiful and well said. The other thing, and you reminded me, what I also like to say is that we're all overwhelmed by the world's problems, right? And don't feel like any of us have the tools to really make a difference or take them on. But what I think is hopeful or optimistic about this issue is there's something really simple that all of us can do and do daily, and it would just change the culture instantly. And so it's very easy on this issue. It's simply believe survivors. Doesn't mean even if they don't speak out in public, if they just come to you one-on-one. If all of us did that, it'd be game over. Because imagine the crime would be taken seriously. We'd have better investigation, adjudication of these crimes. Survivors would be able to heal more rapidly because we know that the trauma is compounded exponentially when you tell someone and you're disbelieved. So that's why we have so much more, PTSD and psychological damage from sexual assault than other crimes. So just that one simple thing, which all of us can do, parents, friends, lovers, siblings. So that's like square one for changing the culture. On top of that, absolutely, stop with the sexist narratives, go after, everything you do in your life, exercise, gender parity and gender equality and respect for women, and also game over. So again, you don't need to, we change the world one person at a time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So jumping off of that, in recent years, there has been some progress made, thanks in large part to survivors speaking out, Amy's documentary. People are much more aware of this issue. There was some policy change. And of course, recently there's been some rollbacks in those policies. So Kim, I'd like to give you a chance to talk about the tools that you use in your work and what student leaders should know about them.
Okay, so I've been at Oregon State for 8 months, right? And over those, I would say September, we rolled out new sexual misconduct policy for everybody. We rolled out the investigation and resolution process for students, because prior to me coming, I probably couldn't tell you that when a student raised an issue in the office, that they would know what would happen, how it would happen, how timely it would happen, and if it would happen, any inquiry process, right? And so when folks come to the office, which is Equal Opportunity and Access, they need to know what to expect. So we put in place a modified policy that has more teeth, clearly articulates what sexual misconduct is in all its forms, the adjudication process, right, versus investigation. And let me just hit the pause button there and back up to say, before I got there, or up until this new process rolled out in September, my investigators investigated. They were judge, jury, and so-called executioner. They did it all. Investigation, adjudication, right? Had their own hearing after they investigated, found if it was a policy violation and rolled out sanctions, right? So with the new policy, the Office of Equal Opportunity, my office, only investigates. We fact find. Nothing else, right? We stop the process there, pass it off to student conduct, who takes the facts of the investigation and determine if, based on all these things that happen, facts only, was a policy violated, right? And if a policy was violated, just because a policy was violated, don't mean you get kicked out. Depends on the egregious nature of the investigation and the findings, right? So if a policy was violated, educational conversation, pending, suspension, if one more thing happened, or suspension for a quarter, expulsion, that goes from soup to nuts. If there was no finding, doesn't mean you just walk away. There's always an opportunity to educate, right? Because had things gone differently, the outcome would have been totally different, right? And so there's always something that a student will get, right? And part of that process is clearly articulating all the steps from notice of complaint to the outcome letter, right? Because in the middle of all of that, I would tell you that what happens is the office can put interim measures into place that include housing reassignment, class reassignment, work schedule adjustments, no contact orders, those kinds of things that help a survivor reporter get through the process. Because, when you're formally investigating something, it's stressful. You could be isolated based on what's happening, and people know the more people you interview in an investigatory process, the more people, start to take sides. Because while you ask for confidentiality or privacy, people going to talk, right? And as a friend of mine would say, when two people know, that's 11, right? And so it's out there, and everybody's chatting it up. So it becomes stressful. But what we try to do with our operating plans and the guidelines that talk about what's going to happen, it's give people a real sense of what to expect when they raise concerns, because prior to the guidelines, they had no idea. And depending on the investigator, there was no consistency in how the investigation was going to be conducted. So we had work to do in-house, and hopefully rolling out those policies and protocols help put that in place.
And I just want to say that every school, right, is responsible for making their own policies.
Absolutely.
There is guidance from the federal level, but each school comes up with their own thing. So this is something students can lobby for and say, what is the policy now and how can it be better, correct?
Exactly. And just to talk quickly about the guidelines that came out from the DOE, Betsy DeVos, what is being proposed at this point is not going to impact anything we're doing. We're not going to pull back or roll back on any enforcement processes we have in place. We are still committed to the task until they say investigating these kinds of things is illegal. We're going to do it, right? So we're committed.
That's great. And I think that's really powerful for everyone to know that, you know, there are limits to what's coming from the top down. And there's so much people on campuses now that you can do and really hold your leaders accountable. So then I want to move a little bit more quickly here. So I'm going to skip some questions. But I'm curious, Amy, if you want to talk about what's different today on campus than when you started the hunting ground. You had mentioned, like, if more people believed survivors, do you think that today institutions across the board are more likely to listen?
You know, progress is slow. I think it's categorically different in that this issue is on the map in a way it's never, ever been before in our history. So that's different since before the hunting ground. And that's not just the hunting ground. I mean, the hunting ground had a large part of that, but it's also that incredible student movement, which kind of like, you know, was to some degree a game changer. But these institutions are super powerful and they're super disinterested in changing their ways. So, you know, one step forward, two steps back. So, and then of course we have the whole, you know, what's going on in the administration that's sort of also sort of setting a tone that isn't exactly conducive to sort of forward-moving thinking on this issue. But you know, that the good news though is it is a different world and a different planet. I mean, I think we all have to really I mean, you're all probably too young to understand and recognize that, but it's really historic and unprecedented. The fact that A, you know, this issue is talked about, B, it's talked about in much more sophisticated, intelligent ways and progressive ways and woke ways. So that's different since the hunting ground, but we have to actually, you know, what everyone was saying is keep at it, you know, win or lose, you keep fighting. And that's super important to remember. And some of us, you know, take it for granted and, you know, have been hurt by that laxity and continuing to be vigilant. So, you know, this is really important. So, you know, so on this issue, again, you know, what I was just saying to someone, I forget who, before this started, that the hunting ground, unfortunately, you know, it was shown 4 years ago on campuses, and now the institutional memory is gone. So, you know, we've actually started, and we don't see any money from this, but another outreach campaign to try and get it again. You know, it sort of should be an evergreen, you know, and speak outs have sort of died down. We hope that that would sort of be an evergreen. You know, so those kind of things I would hope can keep this issue active and alive and on the forefront of people's minds and consciousness. So that means activating alumni and faculty and students continually each year.
Yeah, always advocating. So Amanda, I wanted to ask you about your experience. You mentioned a little bit but you dealt with the criminal justice system, if I remember correctly. And so I was wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about that and what was your main frustration or many frustrations with the criminal justice system.
The laundry list.
Yeah.
So I am a survivor in Massachusetts, and when I went to the hospital, I found out that the evidence collected, the forensic evidence, also shorthand called a rape kit, could be destroyed in 6 months, even if the statute of limitations in Massachusetts is 15 years, and on a very double standard way, convicted rapists had the right to hold on to the DNA evidence in the rape kit for the duration of their conviction. And when I started researching what my rights were, I found that across the United States, there were different sets of civil rights for rape survivors. So had I been raped in another state that had civil rights pertaining to my case, which is preservation of evidence, this wouldn't have happened to me. And I've mentioned I'm a pathological optimist, but I also have a deep belief in our legislative process. I thought that I had a choice. I could accept the injustice or rewrite the law. One of these things is a lot better than the other, so I rewrote it. We put together a team of attorneys, of scholars, of activists, coalition built, and then wrote the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights. And I was, I just turned 26. And so I want people to know that you may feel like you don't have a lot of resources, but no one can make you invisible if you demand to be seen. And when you are doing your work, we may be planting seeds to trees we will never sit under. But for people like the father that I met, sometimes there are these signals that say, yes, you're doing this, you're on the right side of history, and keep on going. So I've written 12 laws now, and successfully passed them. And the first law I worked on, the Massachusetts law, was really hard for me. That was my own civil right. We wrote it so that Massachusetts would preserve these evidence rape kits. And I remember I was living in I still live in DC, but I was getting on a plane to go to Massachusetts to fight for this because it was the closing of the legislative cycle. We only had until the end of the day to get the state house to vote on it. And I was in the airport already, and my policy advisors from Massachusetts calls in and said, the speaker is not bringing up your civil rights for a vote. It's gonna die. And I went into the bathroom and I was just like, geez, well, what's the point of going? I'm just gonna watch them slaughter my civil right. And it was people who were in my team, we call them risers, who encouraged me to get on the plane. I remember a woman from Oregon, Brenda Tracy, who said to me, just stand there and let them watch your face as they all walk out. And I was the last person on that plane. And then for the next day, for 14 hours straight, we just literally walked into people's offices and you're like, hi, there's a bill, it's my own civil right, I want to talk to you about it. And for 14 hours straight, we lobbied the state house. And at the end of those 14 hours, we got people to call in. I mean, I saw the calls go into the speaker's office, and he caved. He brought it up, and it passed unanimously, and now it is law. And I just, I think that there are so many things that we all want to do, but just know that if you feel alone, you have it in you to change the world. I know it's so cliche, but it's real. You put in the effort, and there will be results.
Thank you. So one of the things that critics of some of these, we talked about civil rights, but the civil rights, Kim, you deal with has to do with Title IX, and Title VII, yes, all of those. And on campus, I think it's a lot of the debate about the campus situation has been that campuses shouldn't be adjudicating because the criminal justice system should be. There's been a lot of concerns raised about due process for the accused, et cetera. So how should, first of all, can you explain why the campus has a obligation to adjudicate those? If you want to say something, Amy, of course you can. And also, how should those systems work together, if they should at all?
Okay, so every constituent group on campus is held accountable for the values that we espouse around policy, right? Employees, misstep, policy violation, fired, right? Students, violation, misstep, expelled. We hold people accountable for bad and egregious behaviors, all people. I would say that with the criminal process, Some students are running parallel to the criminal process as well as an internal investigatory process. So say an incident happens, the police get a report over the weekend, they press charges, do an investigation. They will ask that my office hit the pause button on our internal investigation pending the criminal process, right? Now that drags this thing out way past 60 days, which is what our reporting requirement is. But we will honor that. So by the time they're charged, sentenced, to 10 years or whatever, our internal process still has to work, because the sentencing could be 6 months, it could be 10 years, 5 years, what have you.
Could also be nothing.
As a campus perspective, we have to decide if when that person is released, we're going to allow them to come back to campus. And most probably that's going to be a no, right? And so we're working our process while they're behind bars, and we're giving them an opportunity through their attorney to respond, giving them an outcome letter that says when you get out of jail, you don't get to pass go and collect 200. You get to bye-bye from the campus, right? So we hold everybody accountable. It's our internal process. It's not a criminal one. It's an internal process that says we don't deem you fit enough to navigate the space around the rest of the campus constituents.
Yeah, we got that question a lot with the hunting ground. And also as when I started making it, my intuition was, why don't people just go to the police? Like, I don't even understand what it is. And so it's true. The difference, as Kim pointed out, is the timeline for the criminal justice system doesn't work for students, right? Like, you could go report to the police, but then, who knows? Your case might not come to even be seen or heard for 4 years. So then what is that? Then you have a predator on the campus for 4 years while you're there, So the time frame doesn't work in order to make the campus a safe space. So that's one reason why the criminal justice system isn't insufficient. The second and really important reason is it's a different measure. It's a different bar, okay? In the criminal justice system, it's preponderance, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And on campuses, it's preponderance of evidence. That's a much easier lift for a victim to achieve some kind of justice more quickly if it's preponderance of evidence than beyond a reasonable doubt, particularly for these kind of crimes. And so that's why I learned, and I say that schools actually have to be in this mix, as imperfect as that might seem and as strange that might seem, because it's more likely that the campuses can be made safer if you have that be the bar that has to be met if someone's to be expelled for committing these crimes. Does that make sense? So that's kind of why. And so then, and the last thing I'll say is when people say, should survivors report? A survivor should do whatever is right for them. There's absolutely no right or wrong, no guilt, no shame. Whatever your path is, like, that's your path, that's your truth, and absolutely, like, more power to you. But when parents say, what should my child do if they've been assaulted? And they say, but she wants to report, my recommendation, if he or she has the temerity and strength to do this, is to do both. Because that way, and there's no harm in doing both, and you're totally fine in doing both. But that way, you're sort of trying both systems to achieve what, an outcome that would be favorable for you.
Perfect timing. So we're out of time, but I did want to add one more thing about what Kim said about the evidentiary standard. The new policy change, and Kim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Betsy DeVos made it so that the schools are allowed to not use preponderance of evidence, but going back to what we said, every school has their own policy and you can lobby. That is something students on campus can lobby for. So I just wanted to say that that's one thing that you guys can do when you go back to your schools. So I think we're gonna do some breakout groups now, have some student discussion. I think we have 15 minutes for that. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll have a Q&A right after that, correct? Okay. Hello? Okay. So we're going to do some Q&A now. Okay. You want to be our first person?
Not to be super overeager, but my name is Dana. My commitment to action after watching The Hunting Ground and I Am Evidence, I created a 31-minute documentary about my experience as a survivor. It's called Life After, basically about different healing modalities that how healing exists outside the courtroom, essentially. And my commitment is to create a 2.5-hour version. But my question is, when I released the documentary, I got like such great feedback. It got, shared on Facebook, but now like no one is excited about it. Like it passed, like it was great. Kind of like you were talking about with the hunting ground. Like how do we like get people interested and excited about, not excited, but interested in the topic when it's not in the news and like when things die down, I guess, is my question. For anyone. How do you get people talking about it?
I don't know. I mean, you just do what you do, and it hits or misses. I mean, Harvey Weinstein's now the gift that keeps giving. I just got a text that the Academy voted today to expel him. That's never happened.
Yay!
Amazing.
Yeah, and what's even more remarkable is the wording is super strong, and the Academy is super. Oh, I'm on camera. Wonderful, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. It's pretty amazing that the wording is like incredibly fierce and pretty badass. So I'm super proud. So I don't think it's about like when things die down. I mean, I think it's about doing what you do, and it'll hit and ignite. I mean, you made a short film. You want to make another one, and have that go through the festivals, and that'll create another ripple. It's all these tiny little ripples. I don't think you have to worry about. I mean, I think all of us are sort of torqued by this social media frenzy, and if you don't like get too many likes in a day, like it's catastrophic. It's like it's not about that, it's about the 8 people that saw your short and you changed their life, and it's about the 30 more that'll. So I'm not that worried about that, and everything has this kind of cumulative effect in ways that none of us can see or foresee. So just keep doing what you do, honestly. I mean, it makes me sad and crazy that a lot of you have a lot of pressure on yourselves to sort of like, walk out the door with, since Weinstein with the Oscar, but it doesn't happen that way. It's all these little battles and little efforts, and then they lead to surprising efforts in other ways, and some will be big splashes and some will be little ripples, but it's all there. It's all good.
Yeah. Also, just come talk to me and I'll give you my email address when this is over. Okay. You. Yes, come on.
So our group had a question about starting conversations with the major perpetrators of those like men in our lives, because like when it comes to of course like response is a huge deal, but prevention's even bigger, and it's a really really awkward conversation to start to say like I have 2 little brothers who are both in frats in the South, and I don't even know like how to start a conversation about like have you ever talked to your bros about this situation like. And respecting women in this kind of situation, I was just wondering, like, and even with people who aren't as close as a brother, like people who you have interacted with who are peers, like how you would start a conversation with them about prevention.
I think you just have it. You just have to have it. I have 2 nephews, one 27 and one 15. And, they call me the diversity police in all circles that I show up in, because I would take you on for your mouth if it's offensive to anybody, right? And so with my nephews, if even jokingly, they are making comments, or saying stuff that, is inappropriate about women, because they see how the men in our family treat women with respect and all of that, right? And so I think you have to call them out. They don't get a pass, right? And if you can't call out your family, your friends, you're not going to be able to call out your colleagues. And I think you start there. Find your voice, find a way. And I was saying earlier, sometimes hard conversations need to be hard, but sometimes hard conversations need to be delivered softly, right? But they need to be delivered, right? So just have it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we did to get people who may not be aware of the problem to be aware is by something most people wouldn't think about. We did all of our PSAs with Funny or Die. So we made them humorous, and it's a really hard line to tread with sexual assault because it's not funny at all. But it's, if you're familiar with like Samantha Bee or like The Daily Show, their brand of humor of like, how is this still a thing? How is this possible? It's so absurd. And we got, we got celebrities with platforms to do this skit about how absurd it was, and people really responded to it. It was a way to deliver it in a softer way, but that was still informative.
Okay. All right, we'll go with you first and then you next.
Hi, so I have a question about mandated reporting. So I can see how that kind of creates a culture of accountability. But as an RA, and I'm sure there's other people here who are RAs or responsible employees in some way or another, I've also seen ways in which mandated reporting can lead to mistrust of an institution, especially when autonomy is stripped from the survivor's hands when they do report. Because I'm mandated to report, and once I report, that information goes into the system, and the system does what the system has to do without that victim having any say in what happens next. And so I was wondering if you could comment on that and comment on how there could be a change in that, or maybe changing and reforming mandated reporting such that it gives more autonomy to the victim.
Okay, so here's how responsible employee reporting happens. Something comes to the office, and we know, right? Third party. We reach out to the survivor via email or phone, mostly email because, they don't phone, text or Twitter or whatever. So we reach out and offer resources to the Survivor Advocacy Resource Center, to CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services, to the Student Advocate, to Ombuds, to all those confidential resources that they could go to besides me, and not have it go past those parties. Those are the four, and medical. Those are the four confidential areas on campus where you can report. So I'm gonna reach out to you. I'm gonna give you 3 attempts to come and tell me, if you want to, what's happening. If you don't, I'm just gonna refer you to resources after the 3rd attempt. I'm gonna assume you don't want anything unless after the first time you say, don't call me anymore, then I'm gonna stop, right? And I'm gonna let it be. Unless what I heard through third party is outrageous and egregious, then I'm going to have to move past what you want. Your needs, not necessarily irrelevant, but if someone did something so outrageous that they need to be removed from campus, I'm going to have to take a deeper dive into what that is. But past that, I'm going to let you drive whether I'm going to do anything or not. So it's mandatory reporting, but it's not mandatory participation all the time. Does that help?
You raise a good point. I mean, I think that students on each campus need to work to change the things that don't work for them. And I think the thing that could help is have administrators hear from survivors. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I've ever found can possibly move the mountain. I mean, a lot of the responses are not appropriate. So the more students on the campus say, look, here's what mandatory reporting did for me, and here's X, Y, and Z, and hopefully, but not all campuses have that. So, you can also cite other campuses and say, look, I've talked to survivors at these campuses, and they had higher rates of reporting because it wasn't mandatory, and they had, a healthier recovery time and all that, I'm with you. It's rough.
Okay. I gave you I promised you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Martha Durkinaman. Thank you so much for being here and for the things you've said. I'm a student organizer at Northeastern with the Sexual Assault Response Coalition, which is our survivor and student-led shout-out advocacy group. at this school. And one of the things that we encounter that's really a challenge is that the administration often views sexual assault as a liability to the school and not a human rights or civil rights violation. And this is really difficult when the school views students as consumers and sexual assault as a liability. And this is a really hard thing to go up against when we're trying to involve students and survivors in the process of how resources are created and disseminated. Because something that's really important to us is having those voices at the table and not just administrators creating policies, but having students and survivors at the table, especially student survivors at the table where the policies are being created. And a lot of the times what we run into is a silencing of dissent and a rejection of our narratives, and time after time it's really, really challenging work. And like you said, one of the most important things is that administrators hear from survivors and hear from what the process is like, and that's hard when talking to administrators means admitting something, and it means you will get reported on if that's not something that you want. So I really appreciate Katie, of course, bringing up how the need for confidential resources on campus. And my question related to that is, what advice do you have for working with administrations that view sexual assault in that way, and how do we build kind of student power and advocate for ourselves in cultures that create that kind of legal and rights treading mentality?
I'll just take one little part of that and then I'll give it to us. I mean, I would speak, I mean, I think you said a lot, but one thing that was really interesting is you said, you know, it's sort of like a different language, right? Sort of the language, and it's sort of what we talk about in the hunting ground. The language of the institution is one of, you know, you're kind of a client and a consumer, and actually their best interests are at heart. Like you think your incentives are aligned, but their incentive is sort of to profit and to protect the institution from any liability. So, you know, your rights, not so much. So speak their language. So consumer dollars have power. So if it's a numbers game, you know, this is sort of what we were trying to encourage with Hunting Ground with moderate success. But, you know, one campaign we thought, which I'd love for someone to run with, is, you know, have parents and, you know, alumni, you know, how they hit you up for donations ad infinitum, you know, have them write a check, take a picture of it and say, this was going to you, but now it's going to my rape crisis center, until you know, take away mandatory reporting, because if you do your homework, it's not the right thing to do. And just, you know, and if that, believe me, money talks, you know. So if you really understand it as, you know, if you do your, you know, as that, I would, in addition to all the other things which are good, I would try and hit them where it hurts, in the language they understand.
Anyone else? Oh. Okay. Here, why don't you just take my class?
Thank you. My name is TJ Everts. I'm from the University of New Hampshire, just north of here. This is actually really a problem that's really sort of captured my interest, especially over this past summer. I've been working really closely with the Prevention Innovation Research Center on campus to find a way to use technology to help with a problem similar to the project that was discussed earlier. So over the summer, we used a lot of research and came up with a solution that not only has educational resources and local resources for students, but also uses technology to help with preventative measures as well. So using an app as a platform to be able to provide ways that people can get out of these awkward and dangerous situations very, very safely. And I was just wondering, I know that the technology has tried to approach this problem before, so I was just curious as to what technology solutions have you seen, and what has been the main problem with them being widespread or adopted?
Sorry, what was the last part of your question?
What challenges have they faced when you try to roll them out in a large scale?
Well, I can speak to the first part of the question. There's this wonderful woman, her name's Jess Ladd, and she created Callisto. Callisto is a reporting app that gives you the option of, I feel like I'm pubbing her now, but solidarity with her. So it gives you the option of not submitting your report until like somebody else also has like the same perpetrator, and then you can have the option of both of you or multiple people submitting it. And that has been, I think, really, really helpful for people, because often it changes whether or not you find out that your rapist also raped somebody else too. And so check her out, Callisto. And I think she's doing really well. I think Stanford just adopted it. That's the latest one. And yeah.
Okay, do we have time for one more? I kind of skipped her. Okay, one more.
I can be
Okay.
So the rhetoric used in policy practice and procedure is focused on what the victim needs to do or what the bystander needs to do. This seems to kind of misplace the responsibility of positive change, and it seems to come a little too late. What kind of preventative measures and policies do you guys think are possible, whether it's both on campus, on a federal level, or on a state level?
Yeah, well, again, if it's a small percentage of people committing these crimes, take them out of circulation. Right, and that's also game over. So again, yes, we don't need to be all learning preventative measures and bystanderish if we actually had good investigative and adjudication processes. That's it's not this epidemic or crazy crime because most men are running around attacking women, not at least in the US right now yet. It's a predator who has a certain, just like a small percentage of people commit robberies, a small percentage of people commit murders. Just take them out of circulation, instead of protect them with our culture.
Yeah, rape is a crime and it's a Class A violent felony, just like murder. So for some reason, people don't believe the victims of it. Actually, I think I have an idea why, and it's because a large number of survivors, not all, but a large are women, and women's lives are just often not taken as seriously when they go and they report. And so as soon as we are able to agree that this is a violent crime and it needs to be treated as one, that's the first step.
Or to say something that I like to say is that take sex out of the equation. It's a crime, period. It's like if someone reports a burglary, you don't go, are you sure your television disappeared from your living room? Are you positive? What were you wearing when you say it left the room? Were you both drinking when you say he took the television? None of those questions come up. And yet this performs statistically identically to any other crime, which is 92 to 98% of the time when someone says they were assaulted, they're telling the truth. But this is the only crime that, is met with disbelief, questioning, challenging a victim. So, we have to stop that too.
Okay. I hope that answered everybody's
And also,
question.
if I can just, because I have to, it's for the advocacy element. If you haven't seen The Hunting Ground, please watch it. If you haven't watched, if you've watched it, please send it to other people to watch. I mean, this is not, we were guns for hire, so we don't make money from it. So just send, it just really does, kind of everything we've all talked about is encapsulated in that, especially the question about how do we tell our brothers. And I do a lot of these things, and typically when you go around on campuses, half of all of you are, 3 people show up because they were assigned to see your movie, and they're all usually on their cell phones, during the film. But when I went to University of Delaware 2 weeks after Sundance, it was standing room only and 500 kids. It was crazy, and they said they'd never seen it like it. So we show The Hunting Ground, and afterwards I was really remember that 3 guys came up to the microphone, and they said, Amy, we don't have a question. We just want to tell you, we are all in. Before we saw your film, we just thought women lied. And now we're going to protect our sisters. It was a fraternity, and we're going to show the film at a fraternity, and we're going to. So it really does change hearts and minds and reach men in a way who don't hear it from the side of women and who are sort of part of our toxic culture of rape mythology, and that's just what they think. Women lie. And so, I do suggest that as sort of an educative tool, which is transformative. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I think we're going to wrap up now. I just want to thank our panelists, and you guys are all great. Thank you for being here. I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming and listening and engaging on this topic. It's obviously very important. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Okay.